Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commands and commands us to engross ourselves in the words of Torah. Now, this morning, title of the drash is, Who is in Command? Korach was the name of a prominent Levite. It's also the name of the 38th reading from the Torah. It comes from the first verse of this week's reading, which says, Now Korah, the son of Ishar, took action. That's in Numbers 16:1. This week's Torah reading tells us the story of how Korah led an unsuccessful rebellion against Moses and Aaron, and after thwarting the insurrection, God confirms Aaron in the priesthood and provides additional legislation regarding priestly and Levitical privileges and responsibilities. Now, most of you know that I spent 26 years in the Coast Guard. I traveled to some 30 countries during that time, served in 7 different ships, 7 assignments ashore, and commanded a ship in Guam. Each of those assignments had definite command structure. If you're wondering what that hokey smokes, Bullwinkle, I didn't remember that picture, but there it is. She snuck that one in on me. All right. Each of those assignments, look at that. I was skinny back in those days, huh? But I'm twice the man I used to be. So, you just now got it, okay. Each of those assignments had a definite command structure. Now, we knew who was the boss. There was no question. Everybody knew who the boss was. When at sea, now there is a further differentiation of who is in charge. The captain is, of course, ultimately in charge. He's in command, but there is also another command structure. Up on the bridge, the area of the ship that has the wheel, and there you go. That's now that's on the Coast Guard cutter Eagle. But regular ships, you'd have a wheel, and not as fancy as that one. And that one there did not have power steering. So, but regular ships do. And up there on the bridge, you got the wheel, you got the engine controls, you got the radar screen, navigation equipment, and most importantly, you got the conning officer. Now, the conning officer was responsible for the navigation of the ship, keeping it on course, looking out for any hazards, ensuring that the ship arrived at its destination in one piece. Now, every 4 hours, there would be a different conning officer. The relieving officer would come up on deck. He would check the ship's position, condition of the engines, status of the seaworthiness of the ship. He would check any written orders from the commanding officer to make sure that during his 4-hour watch, all the captain's orders were carried out. When he was satisfied that all was well, he would salute the offgoing officer and say, I relieve you. The offgoing officer would then say, I stand relieved. The oncoming officer would then loudly and clearly announce to all present on the bridge, I have the conn. All of the personnel on the bridge would then acknowledge the command, the change of authority with a hearty, aye, aye, sir. Okay? Now, why was all that necessary? Was that just an archaic old seagoing tradition, or did it actually serve a purpose? Yes, to both. It was an old seagoing tradition, but it actually served a purpose. The ritual was and is still today very important. It established without question who was in immediate command and control of the ship. The immediate one, not the ultimate, but just there on the bridge. Even if the captain or the executive officer came up on the bridge, the conning officer was still responsible for the navigation and ultimate safety of the ship. Unless the CO or XO announced to the bridge crew that he had the conn, it was always assumed that the duty officer retained control of the ship. Now, I can also tell you that there were times when, as executive officer, well, it's when I was an operations officer to the executive officer until I was a captain. There were times when I would go up there on the bridge, looking around, just making sure everything was good. And if I saw something that a junior officer had gotten himself into a pickle with something in the navigation or something like that, there were a few times where I just stepped in and I said, I would say, Lieutenant so-and-so, step aside. And then I would announce to the bridge that I have the conn, and so then they would know who is ultimately in charge right then, whether I was the ops boss, the XO, or the CO. Very important thing. Now, our Parsha today is tied to this concept of command and control. The story centers around the characters of Korach, the character of Korach, and who, he unsuccessfully mounted this coup attempt against the leadership of Moses and Aaron. Now, what was wrong with the actions of Korach and his fellow rebels? On the face of it, what they said was both true and principled. Numbers 16:3. They assembled against Moses and Aaron, and they said to him, "You've gone too far. All the community is holy, not just, all of them. And Adonai is with them. Then why do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of Adonai?" Now, they had a point. God had summoned the people to become a kingdom or a nation of priests and a holy nation. So priests and kings, and so that is that a kingdom where every one of the members was in some sense a priest, and a nation where every member was holy. Now, what is holy? We've talked about that many times. Holy does not mean sinless. Holy means separated out, okay? And so Moses himself had said, if only Adonai would make all the people prophets. We talked about that last week, if you were awake. And if only Adonai would put the Spirit on all of them. These are radically egalitarian sentiments, but why then was there a hierarchy with Moses as a leader and Aaron as high priest? What was wrong with Korach's statement was that even at the outset, it was obvious that he was duplicitous. There was a clear disconnection between what he claimed to want and what he really sought. Korach was not seeking out a society in which all the priests were the same. He was not, as he sounded, a utopian anarchist seeking to abolish hierarchy altogether and just make everyone the same. No, he was instead mounting a leadership challenge. As Moses later words to him that indicated this, he wanted to be high priest himself. He was Moses and Aaron's cousin, actually, first cousins. And he was the son of Yitzhar, the brother of Moses and Aaron's father, Amram. And he, therefore, felt it was unfair that both the two highest leadership positions fell to two guys within the same family, okay, within that clan. He claimed to want equality. In fact, what he wanted, though, was power. Now, that was the stance of Korach, the Levite. But what was happening was more complex than that. There were two other groups involved. The Reubenites, Dathan and Aviram, formed one group, and then 250 Israelite men, leaders of the community, chosen from the assembly, men of repute, were the other group, okay? So they too had their grievances. Well, what were those? The Reubenites were aggrieved because as descendants of Jacob's firstborn, remember Jacob's firstborn was Reuben. They had no special leadership roles. The tribe of Reuben was just one other tribe. They had no leadership role. According to Ibn Ezra, the 250 men of rank, that they were upset after the sin of the golden calf. Leadership passed from the individual tribes, where there were leaders in the tribes. Leadership passed from them, from the firstborn within each tribe, to the single tribe of Levi. All right? So I don't know if you ever, when you read all of that, if that stuck with you, but it was a great big change in how the hierarchy within the clans of Israel were recognized. So these guys, they were an unholy alliance, and it was bound to fail, since all of their claims, their individual claims, they conflicted. If Korach achieved his ambition to become high priest, well then the Reubenites and the men of rank would have been disappointed. Had the Reubenites won, Korach and the men of rank would have been disappointed. And had the men of rank achieved their ambition, Korach and the Reubenites would be left out, and the cold. So the disordered, fragmented narrative sequence in this chapter is a case of style mirroring substance. This was a disordered, confused rebellion whose members were united only in their desire to overthrow the existing leadership. Now, none of this, however, unsettled Moses at this point. What caused him frustration was something else altogether, the words of Dathan and Abiram. He said, "Isn't it enough that you brought us from a land flowing with milk and honey, only to kill us in the wilderness? And now you would lord it over us. What's more, you haven't brought us into a land flowing with milk and honey, nor given us an inheritance of fields and vineyards. Would you now gouge out the eyes of those men? We won't come." And so the biggest problem for Moses was this monumental untruth that these guys were making, the claim that they were making. Egypt, where the Israelites were slaves, and cried out from God to be saved, well, guess what? That was not a land flowing with milk and honey, not at all. Even if it was, when you're a slave, you didn't get any, So what's going on here? The sages define it as in one of their most famous statements. If you read the sayings of the fathers, Pirkei Avot, well, this one is the Mishnah Avot, said, "Any dispute for the sake of heaven will have enduring value. But every dispute not for the sake of heaven will not have enduring value." Okay? It may have value in the short term, but not enduring. So what is an example of a dispute for the sake of heaven? Well, the dispute between Hillel and Shammai. Those were two famous Jewish sages, philosophers, and so they disputed all the time, back and forth. And so we get some great examples of Jewish thought from both poles. I mean, it'd be equivalent to I don't know, say a Pentecostal talking to a Baptist. There were some things that were the same. They both worshiped the one Lord, but they had differences on the outside. Well, that's Shammai and Hillel. They would argue back and forth all the time, but that gave us a better picture of God's kingdom. Okay? Now, what would be an example of not for the sake of heaven? Well, You just got it right here. The dispute of Korach and all of his company. Now that comes from Mishnah Avot 521. The rabbis did not conclude from the Korach rebellion that argument was wrong. You know how it is. Two Jews, you got three opinions. And so, the leaders were entitled, that it doesn't tell them that the leaders Moses and Aaron were entitled to unquestioning obedience. That just doesn't, that's not a Jewish thing. That the supreme value in Judaism should be, as it is in some faiths, submission. Some faiths, you do it my way or the highway. Because the guy in Rome says, this is the way we're going to do it. Well, on the contrary, argument is the lifeblood of Judaism. Just remember that. So long as it is rightly motivated and essentially constructive in its aims, okay? Arguing just to be arguing and cutting people down, denigrating other folks, that's not proper. Hopefully we will never see it in Tree of Life. If I do see it, I will shut it down in a pair of New York seconds, okay? Because we're not gonna cut people down. We're not gonna denigrate people. But we can sure argue, Judaism is a unique phenomenon, a civilization, all of whose canonical texts are anthologies of argument. If you read Mishnah, Gemara, the Pirkei Avot, all of the Targums, all of those different Jewish writings, they're arguing back and forth. Rabbi, X will say this, Rabbi Y will say this, and boy, they will argue their cases, very, very vigorously. But does that make it wrong? No, that just gives you 2 points of view. If you read commentaries from, Christian commentaries from, say, Calvin or Matthew Henry or Adam Clark or John MacDonald or, Billy Graham, or whatever, you're liable to get some differences in opinion. There are those that say that the gifts of the Spirit are no longer alive and well in today's world. Okay, then there are other commentators that said, oh, yes, they are alive and well in the world. Okay, is it wrong for them to argue and make their case? No. But, there may be a right and a wrong answer, but the idea of just arguing, being the argument itself being wrong, no, it's not. In the Tanakh, the Old Testament, we had heroes of faith: Abraham, Moses, Jeremiah, Job. They argued with God. They did. They would argue with God. The Midrash is founded on the premise that there are 70 faces, 70 legitimate interpretations of Torah. Now, the Mishnah is largely constructed on the model of, Rabbi X says this, Rabbi Y says this, and the Talmud, that was the Mishnah. Remember, the Mishnah is a comment on the Old Testament, on the Torah. Mishnah is a commentary on Torah. It was completed around 200 A.D., all right? Then, after that, they said, shoot, we still have some questions here. Let's look at the Mishnah, and so then they started doing more commentary and questions, and so out of that grew the Gemara. Okay, the Gemara is a commentary on the Mishnah. So you have a Mishnah commentary on the Torah, then Gemara commentary on the Mishnah. Mishnah was completed around 700 A.D. The Gemara was completed around 700 A.D. Then after that, we still have all the writings of Maimonides and Rashi and various other ones, even down to my good old friend Jonathan Sacks, whom I quote a lot and steal from his brilliance all the time. This sermon case in point. Because why? Because he's a brilliant guy and he has a lot of good stuff to say. Is everything that he says right? No, because he does not. He did not recognize Yeshua as the Son of God and divine. Okay, so we have a difference there. But we can still argue, and so the Talmud, far from resolving these arguments, usually just deepens them considerably. You know, many more arguments. Argument in Judaism is a holy activity, the ongoing internal dialogue of the Jewish people as it reflects on the terms of its destiny and the demands of its faith. Now, what then made the argument of Korach and his co-conspirators different from that of the schools of Hillel and Shammai? Rabbeinu Yonah offered a simple explanation. An argument for the sake of heaven is one that is about truth. Okay? Now, an argument not for the sake of heaven is about power. The difference is immense. In a contest for power, if I lose, I lose. But if I win, I also lose, because in diminishing my opponents, I've also diminished myself. If I argue for the sake of truth, then if I win, then I win. But if I lose, well, you what? I also win, because being defeated by the truth is the only defeat that is also a victory. I'm enlarged. I've got a better outlook on life. I learned something that I did not know before. And, a lot of times when we're in arguments and we get into discussions, and you guys don't know, but I get phone calls all the time from people that they get on the internet and they find, Rabbi Google says this or whatever, and so like one guy says, of course, that the Jews have messed up the calendar system, and that they really don't know, what day it really is. And do you really know what Shabbat day really is? And of course, I'm a mild-mannered kind of guy. Now, the older I get, the less stuff like that. But that dude triggered me. Okay? I says, you think for the last 3,500 years we've been killed, we've been put in ovens, we've been hung, we've been slaughtered, and we don't know what day Shabbat is, And I said, I don't care what, all of that, these guys that you see on internet with their long beards and their, all of that, and they're not even Jews, okay? The couple of them that I'm talking about, not even Jews, but they're again. They got a following, and so it's just I get into those kind of deals. I try not to argue with people, and a lot of times when they do that, I just revert to the scriptures, because then I don't have to argue. Especially when people these alternate lifestyles and so on and so forth, and 57 varieties of genders. No, that's ketchup. That's 57 varieties, not genders. Okay, and so just remember that. All right, there's only 2 genders. Why do I know that? Because in Genesis it said God created man and woman. He made the man first. Then he says, I can do better than that, and he made woman. And that's why Adam looked over there at Eve when he first saw her and said, whoa, man. And so, is everybody awake now? Okay, good. Moses could not have had a more decisive vindication than the miracle for which he asked and was granted. Because what happened? The ground opened up and swallowed all of his opponents. That's pretty direct, okay? And yet, not only did this not end the argument, if you can believe that, it diminished the respect that Moses had within the people, because just the very next day, the entire community came to him and said, you have killed Adonai's people. And Moses needed to resort to, that that he had to resort to force on that was a sign in itself that he had been dragged down to the level of the rebels. And that's what happens when power, not truth, is at stake. Okay? And then what was, I think it was Mark Twain that said, don't ever argue with an idiot or ignorant people because they have just so much more experience at that, you know, and that they'll beat you at the arguments because they got lots of experience in ignorance, you know. So yeah, sometimes arguing with people that don't know and don't know that they don't know, that's just you're wasting your time. So one of the aftermaths of Marxism, and it actually persists in movements such as the postmodernism and post-colonialism and all of that, is the idea that there is no such thing as truth. Truth is transitory. Truth is like a mist, you know, and that there's only one thing, and that's power. That's the only thing that matters is power. Well, that prevailing discourse in society represents not the way things are, but the way the ruling power wants things to be. Okay, those that are, you know, they got power and they want to stay in power. Okay, sound familiar with what's going on in our country today? And all reality is socially constructed to advance the interest of one group or another. The result is a hermeneutics of suspicion, in which they no longer listen to what annoys what anyone says, but they merely ask, what interest are they trying to advance? Now, and we see that every day here. Truth, they say, is merely the mask worn to disguise the pursuit of power. To overthrow a colonial power, you know, you would have to invent your own discourse, your own narrative, and it doesn't matter whether it's true or false. All that matters is, do people believe it? Okay? We've seen that in the world history. Sometimes they would overthrow governments. Well, was it a righteous thing to do? I believe in our own nation, when we overthrew England and became our own nation, yes, I believe that was a righteous thing. It was ordained by God, and but at the same time, you see in the regions, Central and South America, over the last 2 or 3 centuries, coup after coup after coup. Were they righteous? I mean, when Maduro and his predecessor took over in Venezuela, was that righteous? No way in this world, because they went from a democracy and a nation that was in pretty good shape. Because I used to work there. I spent a week every month in Venezuela, and it was great. I loved Venezuela. It was just, I mean, it was a great place to work. And those guys destroyed it, absolutely destroyed it. So not all of those revolutions and coups are good. So that's what's happening now in the campaign against Israel, and you've heard it, on campuses all over the world, called the BDS. Have you ever heard that one? Boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And that is, it's a movement that, like the Korach rebellion, it brings together people who have nothing else in common. Some belong to the far left, a few to the far right. Some are anti-globalists. Some are, while they're genuinely concerned about the plight of the Palestinians, they drive. The whole thing though that drives it is anti-Semitism. They just don't like Jews. I mean, that's when you get right down to it. That's all there is. And so all of these different things that they've talked about, they've got so many more differences than they do commonalities, and yet they won't listen to anybody else. Sound familiar again? Right now, people have got these ideas of what is right and wrong. The classic example, abortion. The abortionists, they think that, a woman's body, it's her choice. Well, guess what? It didn't matter when they were trying to shoot you up with a vaccine that didn't work, woman's body, well, that's different, and so they won't listen, and that's the kind of arguments that you get. That's the arguments you get from a child, goodness sake. And so people just won't listen to you anymore. So, there's just all sorts of stuff out there that people are talking about. Well, Israel should not, the Jewish people don't belong in Israel because they never were in Israel. What? Yeah, but they'll say that with a straight face, and then they'll just, hammer down on it. And there never was a temple in Jerusalem. You've heard that argument? I don't know. And so they call Israel a colonial oppression power, a foreign transplant alien to the Middle East. And so that kind of rivals the claims of Datan and Abiram, that Egypt was a land flowing with milk and honey, But what they really wanted, they wanted power. They wanted to take over the land, or the people that are the BDS today, and the nations around Israel. They just want to take over the land. So this is all very sad indeed, since it is opposed to the fundamental principle of the university as a home. The BDS it's centered in the university. And so universities are supposed to be what? They're supposed to be a place where you teach kids, to young men and women, how to think, okay? It's not supposed to be a thing where you teach people what to think, okay? Very important. And so, if you got kids, make sure you try to let them understand that, so that, that when they get to the universities, that they don't get to... those godless people that are there don't get to fill your kids' heads with, with what was it Rush Limbaugh used to call it, just a head full of mush or something like that. That's not right. Okay. The Supreme Court decision last week regarding abortion is another example between the dichotomy of truth and power. Okay. And the truth is that abortion is nothing more than the murder of innocent human beings for the convenience of another human being. Okay? That is the gospel according to Sheik when it comes to abortion. It is nothing more than the murder of an innocent human being for the convenience of another human being, a selfish human being. Maybe that's a little bit too far, but another human being. One side of the political spectrum in this country sees it as an opportunity to rally people to their cause and retain power in the government. And, buddy, you're going to see it come November, even more and more. The opposite side sees the decision as a result of 50 years of prayers of the saints. And that's the way I look at it, okay? So you can tell which side I'm on. There's no question. I'm not sitting on any kind of a fence. And, all right? The light of truth has finally found a bit of a flicker in the smoldering darkness of our world, and hopefully we see more and more of this as time goes on. Yeshua taught us that in John 8:31, it says, "If you abide in my word, then you are truly my disciples. You will know the truth, and what? The truth will set you free," okay? In the gospel, there are at least 4 dozen references to power. And in none of these references did I find that there was an admonition to seek power for yourselves. Nowhere in the New Testament it says, go for the power. Go for the, get that brass ring. Make sure that you're the big kahuna. Nowhere in the New Testament does it tell you to do that. In fact, the opposite is really taught repeatedly. In Matthew 18:4, it says, "Whoever then shall humble himself like this child, this one is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven." Mark 9:33-37 says, "They came to Capernaum, and when Yeshua was in the house, he began to ask the disciples, 'What were you discussing on the way?' He knew. But they kept quiet because on the way they had argued with one another about who was the greatest. Can you imagine that? Sitting down, he called the 12 and said to him, look, if any man wants to be first, he shall be the least of all and the servant of everyone. Taking a small child, he set him in the midst of them, and taking him in his arms, he said to them, whoever welcomes one of these children in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes not, and whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me. The path to greatness and power is through the Word of God. The path to greatness and power is through the Word of God. Follow the ways of Yeshua. Be the servant. Let the power of God and the truth of Yeshua be your commanding officer. If you do that, your life will be richer beyond any human quest for power or truth. You know, I could go on with all sorts of examples, you know, and in my own life, you know, I'll admit it. One of my goals in the industry was I wanted to be vice president or president of a major corporation. Well, I didn't quite get there. And, you know, there was a time where, you know, I thought, well, wouldn't it be nice to be an admiral in the Coast Guard? But there again, I didn't get there. And then, okay, so here I am leading a congregation, and I look around and I say, well, you know, wouldn't it be nice to have 2,500 people in our congregation? We ain't there yet. We never will be, probably. Because why? I don't think I'll ever let it get that big. Because why? Because then I can't take your phone calls personally. You know, people ask me all the time, says, why are you answering the phone? Because I said, that's the number I give to people because I want people to be able to get to me. And so I know what's going on in our congregation. And if I have some friends that pastor in Orlando, and their little church is 125 people. They've been there for 40 years. It's 125 people. And I asked them, I said, why didn't you ever grow? I mean, that's pretty small, you know. And, you know, that's the way preachers and stuff, they judge their success by how big is your church, you know. And people, you know, they'll ask me that all the time, you know. And I said, well, hey, we're back to sort of our pre-COVID numbers. And, but, you know, if everybody showed up, we'd have 100. But it's not that way. But that's the way they count these things. And, you know, I've told people, I said, well, we're currently running between 400 and 500 people. That's what I tell them. It's more than 4 and a whole lot less than 500, you know? So, but those kinds of things, that search for power, that search for success, where do you find that? You find that in following God's word, being obedient to him, and being that person that people look at and said, you know, there's something special about them. It's not so much the person, but it's who's inside them. That is success, and that's how you speak truth to power. The truth of the Lord, it said it will set you free. And the only power we need is the power of the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit. That's where true power is. So could we stand and